The paradox of kindness. There's something nobody tells you when you're growing up. Nobody sits you down and says, hey, that beautiful thing inside you, that warmth, that generosity, that instinct to give people the benefit of the doubt, it can be used against you. Nobody warns you that kindness, one of the greatest human virtues, can become the very thing that destroys your peace, drains your energy, and leaves you feeling hollow. We live in a world that celebrates kindness, and it should. Kindness is powerful. Kindness builds communities, heals relationships, and makes life worth living. But here's the truth that most self-help books gloss over, that most motivational speakers skip past. Kindness without wisdom is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. Today we are going to talk about the price. The real, tangible, emotional, psychological, and sometimes financial price of being too kind to the wrong people. This is not a conversation about becoming cold. This is not a conversation about building walls. This is a conversation about becoming conscious, about understanding that your kindness is a resource, and like every resource, it must be invested wisely. So let's begin. Do hiocho are the wrong people? Before we talk about cost, we need to define terms. Who are the wrong people? Because when I say wrong people, I'm not necessarily talking about evil people. I'm not talking about cartoon villains. Most of the people who drain you, who take advantage of your kindness, who leave you worse off, most of them are ordinary human beings with their own wounds, their own fears, their own unresolved pain. The wrong people, in this context, are simply people who are wrong for you, at least at this stage in your life and theirs. They fall into a few categories. First, there are the chronic takers. These are people who have learned, consciously or unconsciously, that they can extract from you without reciprocating. They always have a crisis. They always need something. And the moment you stop giving, you become the villain in their story. Second, there are the people who mistake your kindness for weakness. These are individuals who interpret your patience as an invitation to push further, your forgiveness as a permission slip to repeat the offense, and your generosity as a sign that you have no limits. Third, there are the emotionally unavailable. These are people you pour into endlessly, hoping that if you just give enough love, enough attention, enough grace, they will finally open up, finally change, finally meet you where you are. But emotional unavailability is not a problem that kindness can solve. It's something a person must choose to address within themselves. And then there are the energy vampires. These are people whose negativity, chaos, and drama are so constant, so all-consuming, that every interaction leaves you depleted, even when they haven't done anything overtly wrong. Recognizing which category someone falls into is the first step to understanding the price you are paying. The emotional cost. Let's talk about the emotional cost first, because it's the one that hits deepest. When you are consistently kind to someone who does not honor that kindness, something happens inside you over time. You begin to feel resentment, and here's why resentment is so dangerous. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps in quietly. It starts as a small irritation, a slight tightening in your chest when you see their name on your phone, a subtle reluctance to show up for them the way you once did, a quiet voice in the back of your mind whispering, "Here we go again." You ignore it because you've been taught that resentment is bad. You've been taught to forgive, to be the bigger person, to choose love, so you suppress the resentment. You smile, you show up, you give again, and the resentment grows. Eventually that resentment doesn't stay contained to just that one person. It starts to color how you see other relationships. You become guarded in spaces where you used to be open. You become suspicious of generosity, both receiving it and giving it. You start to wonder, is everyone just taking from me? Does anyone actually care? This is emotional exhaustion. And it is one of the most insidious costs of chronic misplaced kindness, because by the time you recognize it, you've often already paid a very high price. There's also the cost to your self-esteem. Every time someone takes your kindness for granted, a small part of you registers the message: your giving is expected. It is not special. It is not valued. Repeat that enough times, and you start to internalize it. You start to believe that your value to others is purely transactional, that people only want you around for what you can provide. And perhaps most painfully, there is the grief, because often the wrong people are people you love deeply. They are family members, old friends, romantic partners, and recognizing that your kindness has not been honored by someone you love, that is a particular kind of grief that doesn't have a clean name. It's the mourning of a relationship you hoped would be different. It's the loss of the version of that person you believed they could be. The physical cost, we don't talk enough about what emotional stress does to the body. But science is clear. Chronic stress, chronic people-pleasing, and the constant suppression of your own needs takes a measurable toll on your physical health. When you are always giving, always accommodating, always shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, your nervous system registers this as a threat. Not the kind of threat that makes you run from a predator, but a slow, sustained, low-grade threat. Your body stays in a mild state of alert. Cortisol, the stress hormone, remains elevated. And over time, elevated cortisol is linked to everything from disrupted sleep to weakened immunity to cardiovascular problems. Think about the person in your life who is given the most selflessly, often to their own detriment. Now think about their health. Patterns emerge when you start looking. The caregiver who never sleeps, the people pleaser with chronic headaches, the one who absorbs everyone's stress and then wonders why their body is always sick. There's also the physical cost of time and energy. Time is not infinite. Energy is not infinite. Every hour you spend managing someone else's emotional crises, cleaning up someone else's messes, or showing up for people who wouldn't cross the street for you, that is an hour you are not spending on your own healing, your own growth, your own joy. This is not selfishness. This is basic economics. You cannot spend $1 twice. You cannot give what you don't have. And when you are constantly operating from a place of depletion, you are not truly giving generously. You are giving from a place of scarcity, and it damages you at levels that go all the way down to the cellular. The psychological cost density erosion here is one of the most profound costs, and one that takes the longest to notice, the erosion of self. When you are too kind to the wrong people for too long, you begin to lose track of who you are outside of your role as giver, fixer, helper, supporter. Your identity becomes wrapped up in being needed. And this is where the psychology gets really complex, because often, the reason we are so kind in the first place is because being needed feels like being loved. For many people, particularly those who grew up in households where love was conditional, or where attention came only when you were useful, kindness became a strategy, a way of securing connection, a way of making yourself valuable enough to keep around. If I am helpful enough, generous enough, agreeable enough, then you will love me. Then you won't leave. This is the deep root of chronic overgiving. It is not purely altruistic. It is, at its core, a wound. And when you keep pouring kindness into people who don't reciprocate it, you are feeding that wound. You are reenacting the original dynamic that taught you love must be earned through endless self-sacrifice. Over time, this erodes your sense of self. You stop knowing what you want because you've spent so long subordinating your wants to the needs of others. You stop trusting your own instincts because every time you felt the urge to pull back, to say no, to protect yourself, you overrode it in the name of kindness. You become a supporting character in your own life story. And the worst part, the people you've been endlessly kind to often don't even notice the shift, because they were never paying that much attention to you to begin with. They were paying attention to what you could do for them. The social and relational cost. Let's look at what happens to your relationships overall when you misdirect your kindness. One of the paradoxes of overgiving to the wrong people is that it almost always means undergiving to the right ones. Your energy, time, and emotional bandwidth are finite. When a chronic taker consumes most of that bandwidth, the people who genuinely love you, who would reciprocate, who would nourish you back, those people get the leftovers. They get the vovers. Ration of you that is tired, guarded, depleted. And over time, some of them stop reaching out. Not because they don't care, but because they sense that you are not really available. So you end up in this painful situation, surrounded by people you've given so much to, who give you so little back, while the people who could have truly loved you well drift away, believing you were simply too busy or too unavailable for real connection. There's also the social cost of your reputation in certain circles. When you are known as someone who always says yes, who never pushes back, who can be relied upon to absorb any request, people will keep making requests, and the ones who are most comfortable making demands of you are rarely the ones who have earned that privilege. You attract a certain kind of person when you have no visible limits, the kind of person who is specifically looking for someone without limits, because they intend to test every single one. And here is the relational cost that perhaps hurts the most. When you finally do set a boundary, when you finally do say no, when you finally withdraw, the wrong people will often respond with shock, anger, and accusations. After months or years of you giving and them taking, the moment you stop, They label you selfish. They say you've changed. They say you used to be so kind. They weaponize your own history of giving against you, using it as evidence that your current limits are a betrayal. And this is devastating to witness because it reveals something that your generosity had been obscuring all along. They were never invested in you. They were invested in the version of you that gave without asking for anything in return. The financial cost, we would be leaving out a significant piece of the picture if we didn't talk about money. Kindness costs money. And when it's directed at the wrong people, those financial losses can be significant and long-lasting. It starts small, usually. You pick up the tab, you lend a small amount. You help cover an emergency. And because your heart is good and you have it to give in that moment, it feels fine. But patterns emerge. The lending becomes expected. The covering becomes routine. And suddenly you look at your bank account and realize that a significant portion of what you've worked for has gone not to building your own future, but to maintaining someone else's present. Money loaned to the wrong people almost never comes back. Not because the person is necessarily dishonest, though sometimes that's the case, but because the dynamic of your relationship has been established as one in which you give and they receive. Repayment would disrupt that dynamic. It would require them to acknowledge an obligation to you, and the wrong people are rarely comfortable with that. Beyond direct financial transfers, there is the cost of opportunities missed. Time spent managing other people's crises is time not spent building your career, your skills, your investments. Emotional energy consumed by difficult relationships is energy not available for creative work, for professional excellence, for the disciplined focus that financial growth requires. And there is the deeper cost of self-worth. When you consistently give your financial resources to people who don't value them, who don't treat your money with the same care you treat it, you internalize a message about your own value. That your work, your time, your resources are not particularly precious. That they can be dispensed with freely and without consequence. How to stop paying the price without lowering your soul now. What do we do about all of this? Because the goal is not to stop being kind. The goal is to become kind in a way that is sustainable, wise, and reciprocal. Here is how. The first step is to audit your relationships honestly. Not cruelly, but honestly. Look at the people in your life and ask, after I spend time with this person, how do I feel? Energized or drained, seen or invisible, appreciated or taken for granted. These feelings are data. They are your nervous system communicating something important to you. Listen, the second step is to learn the difference between guilt and intuition. When you try to pull back from a chronic taker, you will feel guilty because you have been conditioned to believe that withdrawing care is abandonment. But guilt that arises from setting a healthy limit is not the same as guilt that arises from genuinely doing something wrong. One is a trained response. The other is a moral signal. Learning to tell the difference is essential. The third step is to practice graduated limits. You don't have to go from total availability to complete withdrawal overnight. Start small. Say no to one small request. Notice what happens. Does the person respect it? Do they push back? Do they try to make you feel guilty? How someone responds to your first no tells you almost everything you need to know about whether they are someone who respects you or someone who has been relying on your inability to refuse. The fourth step is to redirect your kindness. This is crucial. The kindness doesn't disappear. It gets redirected toward people who will receive it with gratitude, who will reflect it back, who will nourish you in return. This is not transactional thinking. It is ecological thinking. Healthy ecosystems involve exchange. When one party only extracts and never contributes, the ecosystem collapses. And the fifth step, perhaps the most important, is to become kind to yourself first, because the reason most of us end up in the cycle of overgiving to the wrong people is that we have not learned to meet our own emotional needs. We outsource that job to external validation. We hope that if we give enough to others, someone will give back to us what we cannot give ourselves, a sense of being worthy enough and loved unconditionally. That has to come from within. And when it does, when you develop a genuine relationship with your own worth, the dynamic shifts completely. You no longer need to earn love through sacrifice. You no longer tolerate relationships built on imbalance, because you know at a cellular level that you deserve more than that. Closing kindness as wisdom. Let me close with this. The world needs your kindness. Desperately, there is not enough of it. And the fact that you have the capacity to care deeply, to give generously, to hold space for others, that is not a flaw. That is a gift. Do not let anyone, including your own painful experiences, convince you to seal that gift away. But gifts, to retain their value, must be honored. A gray painting stored in a dark basement loses nothing of its intrinsic worth, but it contributes nothing to the world. Your kindness, given to those who cannot see its value, does not stop being beautiful, but it stops being effective. It stops building anything. It stops creating the world you are trying to create. Choose your recipients wisely, not based on who needs you most, because there will always be people who need you. Choose based on who sees you clearly, who values the whole of you, not just your usefulness, who is willing to grow alongside you, to be honest with you, to show up for you in the seasons when you are the one who is struggling. The price of being too kind to the wrong people is your peace, your energy, your time, your sense of self, your financial security, your deepest relationships. These are enormous things to pay. They are too much to pay for people who are not paying attention. Be kind. Be incredibly, fiercely, beautifully kind. But be wise. Direct that kindness like sunlight through a lens. Focused, intentional, powerful. Not scattered across surfaces that cannot hold the warmth. You deserve to give your best to people who can truly receive it. And they deserve to find you not hollowed out, not depleted, not resentful, but whole, full, radiant with a kindness that has never been extinguished, only refined. That is the life that waits on the other side of this lesson. Go build it.